Today I'm going to be presenting on a selected piece from the collection Portraits in Jazz, which was written by Valerie Capers. Before I start speaking about the specific piece, I wanted to take a moment to just share some information with you about Valerie Capers as a composer, and then also about the collection Portraits in Jazz as a whole. Valerie Capers is a living American pianist and composer born in 1935. She is blind and has been for the majority of her life since the age of 6, and she is most well known for her collaborations in and her contributions to the jazz genre. That being said, she is also classically trained and received a bachelor's and master's degree from the Juilliard School. She is the first blind graduate of the Juilliard School of Music, and she currently resides in New York City, where she has held teaching positions at the Manhattan School of Music and the Bronx Community College. In 2000, Capers published Portraits in Jazz through Oxford University Press. This is a collection of 12 pieces that range within the intermediate through early advanced levels. And this collection was composed specifically for classically trained students to be exposed to the jazz genre and to jazz styles, to help teachers and students and performers in understanding more about each specific piece. There are interpretive notes and annotations provided at the end of the hard copy of this book. Every single piece in this book is inspired by either a specific jazz style or by a jazz great. And some of the jazz greats who were included in this set include Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, Billie Holiday, and Ella Fitzgerald. The piece that I would like to share specifically with you today is titled Mr. Satchmo. This is the 8th piece in this collection, and it is leveled at a McGraw level 7 or 8. So this is a perfect piece for a late intermediate to early advanced student. Mr. Satchmo is a nickname specifically for Louis Armstrong, and so this piece was inspired by him. The interpretive notes at the end of the collection state that in Mr. Satchmo, this piece aims to capture the feeling of old New Orleans street bands, which strut and dance more than they march. So Capers specifically states that the performer needs to be very careful about the tempo that they choose, to not play it too fast, because you want to choose a tempo that has that strut-like feel that is really important to the New Orleans jazz style. Louis Armstrong is from New Orleans, and his early career was spent playing in New Orleans street bands. And so this particular piece really captures the essence of his musical upbringing and of the New Orleans jazz tradition. The New Orleans jazz style is really characterized by the idea of call and response. And the call and response tradition within this style evolved from African drumming and combined it with popular dance music that is played by brass bands in New Orleans. New Orleans jazz style has a very distinctive sense of improvisation, and you can see this call and response combined with improvisation in the general form of the band playing and then a soloist playing. So in Mr. Satchmo, we have the brass band sections, which are characterized by right-hand chords that play over left-hand single bass notes. You can see here in the excerpt that is outlined in red. And then that's immediately followed by a soloist part. And if we're thinking about Louis Armstrong, who was a prolific jazz trumpeter and jazz vocalist, then we can maybe think about this solo section as a trumpet solo, and this is characterized by the right hand playing single note lines and figurations, usually with grace notes or ornaments added and really distinctive rhythms. So in this piece, Mr. Satchmo, we often have this alternating back and forth between the brass, which is color-coded here for you in red and then at the end in green, alternating with the solo part, maybe a trumpet solo, which is outlined for you and colored here in blue. So you can see when you look at the piece, you have red, blue. So it's always going back and forth and back and forth. So one of the first things that you might do with a student when you're introducing them to this piece, not only is to introduce them to New Orleans jazz style by maybe sharing some recordings or some videos and some examples of what that style of music sounds like, and maybe also introducing them to Louis Armstrong and listening to some of his music, but then you might also talk about this idea of call and response and outline this piece for a student in this way so that they can really see the sections that are meant to sound like a brass band and then the sections that are meant to sound like a soloist. Some of the pedagogical challenges that occur in this piece primarily take place in the rhythms. And so this piece is swung. There are lots of triplet rhythms that happen throughout, mostly in the right hand, but they also take place in the left hand. And then in the right hand specifically, there is a lot of chromatic chordal movement. So making sure that students are really carefully reading through those chords and getting a sense of those chord shapes. The chromatic chordal movement primarily happens in the brass band sections. There are also frequent and irregular accents and accent articulations, as well as staccato articulations that happen throughout this piece. And so this is a really excellent opportunity to reinforce how to play the accent with balancing the weight of the hand and weight of the arm with some finger action to really bring out those accents with a clarity of tone. Lastly, some of the rhythm sections in the solo parts or the trumpet solo parts can be particularly tricky. So if you look at this excerpt here that is provided in measure 23 and 24, this is a solo part. And this particular line happens twice in the piece, but it happens in such a way that feels like a very abrupt change of tempo and style compared to some of the other solo lines. And so one of the ways that you might approach this section is by first making sure that students have a sense of where the notes are moving, understanding the fingering suggestions, being able to play through those notes with clear accent and staccato articulations, which are alternating back and forth, understanding the sense of rhythm and the general pulse, where you have these eighth notes moving into 16th notes in a swung triplet rhythm, and then really being able to play that in such a way that sounds like a bright and distinct solo part. So with all of that in mind, please enjoy this performance of Mr. Satchmo, written by Valerie Capers for her collection, Portraits in Jazz.